The first light of dawn crept over the vast estate of Ashbourne Hall, but it brought no warmth with it. Instead, it slipped through the tall arched windows like pale judgment, touching the cold marble floors and gilded frames with a sorrowful glow. Outside, the gardens lay still beneath a lingering mist, roses bowed under the weight of night rain, as if even nature itself dared not celebrate this morning. Inside, silence reigned with unnatural heaviness, for within those ancient stone walls, the heir of Ashbourne had been born. Or so the household had prayed. Down the long corridors, servants stood frozen in clusters, hands clasped tightly, eyes lowered, waiting for the sound that would determine their future as much as the child's. The Duke's bloodline was not merely a matter of inheritance. It was law, legacy, and pride carved into generations of aristocratic expectation. A son meant survival. A daughter meant uncertainty. In the grand chamber above the east wing, the Duchess lay surrounded by lace sheets damp with exhaustion. Her golden hair clung to her forehead, her breath uneven yet steady as she held the fragile life pressed against her chest. The child stirred softly, wrapped in white linen, unaware of the storm her existence had already summoned. A nurse stood nearby, trembling as she watched the door more than the mother or child, because everyone was waiting for him, and then at last the sound of boots echoed through the corridor, measured, controlled, unhurried. The Duke of Ashbourne arrived as though he were entering a courtroom rather than a nursery of new life. His presence commanded the space before he even stepped inside, his tailored black coat untouched by travel or haste, his expression carved into aristocratic restraint. Behind him, whispers in the hallway died instantly, as if the very air feared his judgment. The nurse bowed quickly and stepped aside. The Duchess lifted her eyes. For a brief moment, something unspoken passed between them, fragile as glass suspended over fire. She had endured hours of agony for this moment, not for herself, but for him, for the name he carried, for the lineage he demanded of her since their marriage had been sealed beneath cathedral arches and whispered vows. The Duke approached the bedside. His gaze did not immediately fall upon his wife. It moved instead to the bundle in her arms. The room seemed to hold its breath. The Duchess adjusted the child slightly, as though presenting proof of something sacred. A soft sound escaped the infant then, a delicate cry that should have signified joy. Instead, it fractured the silence. The Duke stared. No smile softened his features, no flicker of wonder crossed his eyes, only a slow tightening of something far colder than disappointment. A nurse lowered her head. One maid pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. The Duchess spoke softly, her voice weary yet hopeful. "She is healthy," she whispered. "She breathes well, and she has your eyes, my lord." A pause, long enough for hope to be born, and then killed. The Duke exhaled slowly, as if the very air had turned bitter. His gloved hand tightened briefly at his side. When he spoke, his voice carried the calm precision of a verdict delivered in court. "I wanted a prince, not this girl." The words did not echo. They did not need to. They settled, heavy, final, unforgiving. The Duchess blinked once slowly, as though she had not understood the language at first. Her arms instinctively tightened around the child, shielding her from something unseen yet deeply felt. Her lips parted slightly, but no sound came. For a moment, even grief hesitated. The nurse stepped forward instinctively, then stopped herself, bowing her head as though apologizing for existence itself. The Duke turned away from the bed. He did not look at the child again. Behind him, the world shifted in invisible fractures. The future of Ashbourne Hall, once imagined as a procession of banners and male heirs, now collapsed into a single fragile cradle of silence. The Duchess watched him take one step toward the door, then another. Her voice, when it finally came, was barely above a whisper. "She is your child." He paused at the threshold, not turning, not answering immediately. Outside, thunder rolled faintly in the distance, though the sky remained pale and still. When he spoke again, it was without anger. That was what made it worse. "Blood does not secure legacy," he said. "Only sons do." And then he left. The door closed with quiet finality, a sound softer than a heartbeat yet heavier than any storm. Inside the chamber, no one moved. The Duchess lowered her gaze to the child in her arms. The infant's tiny fingers curled instinctively, grasping at nothing but air, as though already searching for something the world had denied her. A tear finally escaped the Duchess's eye, though she did not wipe it away. She simply watched it fall onto the linen wrap, disappearing like a secret into fabric too pure for such sorrow. Outside, Footsteps faded down the corridor, growing distant, until even the estate itself seemed to forget its master had ever entered. A maid whispered a prayer no one acknowledged. The nurse reached for the basin of warm water, her hands shaking as she tried to resume duty, though every movement felt wrong, interrupted, incomplete. The Duchess shifted slightly, pressing her lips to the child's forehead. "I will not let his words define you," she murmured, though whether it was promise or prayer, even she did not know. Far below in the great hall, the Duke stood alone for a brief moment before the ancestral portraits of Ashbourne men. Their painted eyes looked down in silent expectation. He did not meet them. Instead, he turned sharply and walked toward his study, already speaking to the estate steward in a voice stripped of softness. "Prepare the succession records," he said. "We will revise them." And with those words, the fate of a daughter, unwanted by the world she was born into, was sealed before she had even learned to cry. Ashbourne Hall changed after that night, though no one spoke of it aloud. It was not a change one could point to like a new painting or a rearranged hall. It was subtler, like air growing colder in rooms that had once been warm, like candle flames burning lower even when fresh wax was added. The estate still glittered with its inherited grandeur, yet something within its rhythm had shifted forever. The Duchess remained in her chambers longer than tradition allowed. She no longer appeared at morning assemblies for visiting ladies, nor did she preside over the customary afternoon teas where noblewomen exchanged smiles sharper than their lace fans. Instead, she stayed beside the nursery wing, where the child now slept under constant watch. A name had been chosen in secrecy. Evelyn, it was never written in official records, never spoken in courtly gatherings. It existed only in the quiet space between mother and daughter, whispered like a prayer meant to be hidden from judgmental ears. The Duke, meanwhile, returned to governance with increased severity. Where once he had been measured, he now became distant. Where once he had spoken with restraint, he now spoke with precision that left no room for warmth. His presence in the estate was brief, often reduced to corridors passed in silence and doors closed without acknowledgement. Yet the court noticed everything. At the weekly gathering in the grand ballroom, beneath chandeliers of cut crystal and gilded light, the aristocracy assembled as they always had. Silk gowns brushed marble floors and conversation flowed like polished theater. But beneath the surface of elegance, something darker stirred. Whispers. Always whispers. Lady Montclair was the first to speak it aloud, though carefully disguised behind her fan. "It is said the Duke has revised his succession plans," she murmured, her eyes glinting with curiosity. "And for what reason?" another lady asked. A pause followed, deliberate and sharp. "A daughter," came the reply, soft as falling ash. A ripple moved through the circle of women, not of shock, but of interest. The Duchess, when she finally appeared briefly in the gallery above the hall days later, wore pale mourning tones that were not officially required. She did not speak, she simply observed the world she had been folded out of. Below her, the Duke stood among the nobility, accepting greetings with mechanical grace. When someone dared to inquire about the child, he answered without hesitation. "A complication," he said evenly, "nothing more." The word spread faster than any decree. Complication. It became a joke whispered behind closed doors, repeated in drawing rooms where laughter masked cruelty. The Duchess heard none of it directly, but silence itself has ways of carrying truth. In the nursery, Evelyn grew unaware of the storm that surrounded her existence. Her small fingers reached for light filtering through lace curtains. Her cries were answered instantly by the Duchess, who refused to allow distance between them. One afternoon, a sealed envelope arrived for the Duchess. No crest marked its origin, only a faint imprint of wax shaped like a rose partially broken in transit. Inside lay a silver locket, delicate and old, engraved with initials that did not belong to any known branch of Ashbourne lineage, and yet it was addressed to her. There was no message, only presence. The Duchess held it for a long time, unsure whether it was kindness, warning, or intrusion. When she placed it around her neck, it felt strangely warm, as though it had once belonged to someone who had loved without permission. That evening, she attended dinner in silence. The Duke noticed the locket immediately, though he did not ask about it. His gaze lingered for only a second longer than necessary before returning to his wine. The distance between them grew not through argument, but through absence of recognition. Days later, at a royal reception held in the capital, the Duke was introduced before assembled nobles beneath vaulted ceilings and burning chandeliers. The Duchess was present, seated slightly apart, her expression composed though her hands remained still in her lap. Conversation turned, inevitably, toward lineage. A young viscount, emboldened by wine and curiosity, asked lightly, "Your Grace, will we soon celebrate the announcement of an heir?" Silence followed. Then the Duke replied without looking toward his wife. "There is no heir yet," he said, "only circumstance." The Duchess felt every syllable as though it had been placed deliberately upon her chest. Later that night, back at Ashbourne, she found him alone in the library. Candles flickered between shelves of inherited wisdom, casting shifting shadows across his profile. She entered quietly. "You have reduced her to silence," she said. The Duke did not look up from the document he held. "I have spoken truth," he replied. "Truth." Her voice trembled now, though she steadied it quickly. "Is it truth to call a child a complication?" At last he looked at her, and something in his expression softened only slightly, as if memory briefly resisted duty. "You do not understand what is required of this house," he said. "I understand love," she answered. "Or at least I thought I shared it with you." The silence that followed was heavier than argument. Then she spoke again, quieter this time, almost breaking. "Is bloodline greater than the promise you once made before God?" The Duke's gaze faltered just for a moment. Candlelight trembled between them as if even the room hesitated to witness what came next. Then he answered, "Love does not secure thrones." The words fell like iron. The Duchess stepped back as though struck, though no physical blow had been given. She studied him for a long moment, searching for the man she had once believed existed beneath title and obligation. But he was already gone, or perhaps he had never been there at all. Without another word, she turned and left the library, her footsteps soft but steady. The silver locket at her throat caught the candlelight as she moved, a silent witness to everything that had been said, and everything that could no longer be undone. Behind her, the Duke remained in the flickering light, surrounded by books that spoke of legacy, power, and history, yet none that spoke of what it meant to lose something irreplaceable while still standing upright. The storm arrived without warning, as if the heavens themselves had been waiting for the right moment to judge Ashbourne Hall. It rolled across the horizon in vast, heavy waves of cloud, swallowing the pale afternoon light until the estate stood beneath a sky bruised with thunder. Rain followed soon after, not gentle or cleansing, but relentless, striking the stone courtyards with the force of accusation. Inside the great house, every corridor felt narrower, every candle flame weaker. Portraits of long-dead dukes seemed to watch with renewed severity, their painted eyes reflecting flickers of lightning that split the windows. The Duchess stood in the grand hall, alone. Her gown was simple now, stripped of ceremonial lace, as though she had already begun the process of leaving behind everything that once defined her place in this world. The silver locket rested against her chest, no longer a mystery but a burden she had learned to carry. Behind her the vast doors opened. The Duke entered. Rain clung to his coat, though he made no effort to acknowledge it. He moved with the same controlled precision he always had, but something in his posture felt altered, as if the storm outside had finally begun to echo within him. He stopped several paces away from her. For a moment, neither spoke. Only thunder filled the silence. Then the Duchess turned. Her eyes met his without hesitation. "You have turned this house into a courtroom," she said softly, "and everyone within it into witnesses of your pride." The Duke's expression tightened. "I have upheld its future." She let out a quiet, almost sorrowful breath. "At what cost?" A pause. Outside, lightning tore across the sky, briefly illuminating the hall in stark white light. In that instant, the distance between them seemed larger than any physical space. "I did what was necessary," he said. "Necessary for whom?" she replied. "For a name carved into stone. Or for a child who never asked to be born into your expectations." His jaw tightened. For the first time, something unsteady flickered beneath his composure. Before he could answer, another sound echoed through the hall. Small footsteps, soft, uncertain. A maid appeared at the edge of the corridor, hesitating before speaking. "My lord, the child, she has wandered from the nursery." The Duchess turned immediately, and then she saw her. Evelyn stood at the base of the grand staircase, barefoot, holding a small white flower she must have picked from the greenhouse earlier that morning. Her hair was slightly disheveled, her expression curious rather than afraid, as if she had simply followed light and warmth into a place she did not understand. The entire hall fell silent. Even the storm seemed to pause in its violence. The Duke froze. For the first time since her birth, he was forced to look at her without distance, without excuse, without the shield of dismissal. The child took one small step forward, then another. She did not run. She did not fear. She simply looked up at the towering figures before her with the innocent certainty of someone who had not yet learned the language of rejection. "Mother," she said softly, her voice fragile but clear. The Duchess moved instinctively, as if pulled by something deeper than thought, lowering herself slightly to meet the child's gaze. "Yes, my love," she whispered. The Duke remained still. The flower in Evelyn's hand trembled slightly as she lifted it toward him, an offering without understanding of consequence. A silence stretched between them so long it felt unbearable. Then, unexpectedly, the Duke knelt, slowly, as though the act itself resisted him. Rainwater from his coat touched the polished stone floor, mixing with the reflection of chandelier light above. He looked at the child, not as an heir, not as a mistake, but as something far more unsettling. Human, his voice, when it came, was no longer commanding. "What have I done?" he said quietly, almost to himself. The Duchess watched him, her expression unreadable, neither victorious nor softened. "Too late for questions," she replied. A distant roll of thunder answered her. The Duke reached out slightly, then stopped. The space between his hand and the child remained unbroken, and that hesitation became everything. The Duchess stood. "You wanted a prince," she said, her voice steady now, "but what you truly rejected was the possibility of love that does not obey you." He closed his eyes briefly. For a moment it seemed as though he might speak, might finally break through the years of pride that had shaped him. But when he opened them again, something in him had already made its choice. Not acceptance, not change, recognition of loss. The Duchess took Evelyn gently into her arms. She turned toward the great doors of Ashbourne Hall. "You will not stop us," she said quietly. The Duke did not respond. Behind her, the hall echoed with silence heavier than any command he had ever issued. Step by step, she walked forward. The doors opened as servants hurried to obey her unspoken departure. Rain poured in, cold and relentless, but she did not hesitate. At the threshold, she paused only once, not to look back at the estate, but at the man who still stood in the center of it. "I loved you once," she said. Then she stepped into the storm, and she did not return. The Duke remained alone in the grand hall as the doors slowly closed. Thunder rolled across the estate, shaking the chandeliers above him, scattering light across the empty space where a future had once been imagined. In the distance, a child's voice called softly, already fading beyond the walls. The flower she had offered lay forgotten on the floor. He stared at it for a long time. Then finally he whispered into the silence that answered him more honestly than any court ever had. "I lost everything." Outside, Ashbourne Hall endured the storm. Inside, its master learned too late that pride builds empires but never families.